Are you a military service member or veteran struggling with insomnia? A new study is investigating a non-drug therapy program that you can receive from your computer or a smartphone. If you find it difficult to fall or stay asleep or feel tired throughout the day, internet-guided cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia may be a treatment worth exploring. If you or a loved one is a current or former military service member, has had a head injury, and are between the ages of 18 and 64, you might qualify for this study. Call or text 301-456-5474 or head on over to militaryveterandad.com/sleep.
Dory 1, this is Fire Team Delta. Dad's coming home.
Welcome to the Military Veteran Dad Podcast, where it is our mission to bring every dad home. I am your host, Ben Cloy. I'm a United States Marine veteran, husband, and a father. We will bring authentic conversations to inspire action in your life so we can close the gap between the dad you are today and the dad you want to be tomorrow. This is the Military Veteran Dad Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back. This is Military Veteran Dad. I am your host, Ben Cloy, with a dad joke for you today. The dad joke for today is, why did the fisherman go to the gym? Awkward silence and pause. To get muscles. You're welcome. Thank you. I am here all night. But you're not just here to hear my corny dad jokes. You are here to be inspired to move the needle on becoming a better dad. And today meets that objective, hook, line, and sinker. The question I have for you to kick off today is, what are you holding back? Think about all the things. If you think of your life on the other side of a dam, what is the dam holding up? What is it holding back from flowing in life? And today I'm talking with Chris Hamm, and we dive into a deep conversation about family, archery, healing, community, and growth. We've never really had an archery conversation on the podcast, and after Ryan Longerman on the podcast, we dive into it again because he cracked me wide open, and I'm hooked, and I'm excited to find and get more into the archery community here in Wisconsin. What are we holding back can often be that one thing that needs to be released in order for us to come home to our families. The mission of this podcast is to bring every dad home, but if you are holding back something, that is not possible. Doesn't matter if it's war, service, or a really bad thought. Now, Chris is not a veteran, but archery has been a part of his life since he was a boy, and now as a business owner, he runs a nonprofit helping veterans find a tool to heal through what life has given them, and that tool is archery. He has amazing stories so far with the work they've been doing, the veterans he's been helping. A story that he posted on LinkedIn really is where I initially found Chris, and I was like, I gotta have this guy on the podcast for the work that they are doing. The events are all over southern Wisconsin. There's a lot of events coming up throughout here in the next few weeks. People fly in all over the country for these events, so make sure you check out the links in the show notes to find those events and figure out if those events work with your timeline. Like I said, they're all throughout the year and all up here in Wisconsin and all different parts of Wisconsin. So make sure you go ahead and check it out if you were a Wisconsin native, or if you're just looking to maybe get out and get away, make sure you check those out as well, because people do fly in from all over the country to support these events. Guys, I have rambled enough. Let's get started with Chris Hamm. And if you want my big takeaway of this podcast, make sure, as always, you hang on to the other side. Today, I'm talking with Chris Hamm. He's a fellow Wisconsinite up by Stevens Point, and he is the owner of HAA Sports. And he has an interesting story of how archery has been integrated with veterans, and he's doing a lot of different work with Ryan Longerman that we spoke with last week on the podcast. And so, Chris, I am really excited for this interview, and just hearing the idea of what archery has done and how you've kind of come into archery, but then also how you've seen it change lives in the worlds of veterans as well.
Yeah, I'm excited to be on the podcast, talking with a fellow Wisconsinite, and just excited to, I guess, share with your listeners, how I've been able to use the blessings in my life through my for-profit business to bring that into the nonprofit world and come alongside our service members and introduce them to archery.
So before we go to what you do currently, tell me, because I imagine my instinct is going off here, how did archery in your younger days change your life? Or what influence did archery have in your life as a person who's figuring out how to adult?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go back to, 1978. I was born in 1975, so my dad was big into archery back when the compound bows were first coming out with the wheels on them. It used to be all the Robin Hood stuff with recurves and long bows, and the late 60s, early 70s is when the compounds came out. So my dad was just eating up with the sport. It was something that he enjoyed, and ended up getting into business for himself, and that's the job that I have today, is running the business that he now started. But I think I shot my first bow and arrow when I was maybe 3 years old. It was one of the little fiberglass ones with the suction cup arrows on the end of it. And so archery's always been a part of my life, and it's just always been a way for me to disconnect, even though, I'm not a service member. I don't have PTSD, but I have, being a human being in the 21st century, I have stresses, and there's something very transformational that happens when you put your phone down, you get outside, you pick up a bow and arrow, and you just shoot arrows into a target. I can't, it's almost something that you have to experience for yourself to describe what that feeling is. But I mean, I've introduced a few people to archery, and the first time that they fire an arrow into a target and you see that light bulb go on, it's magical. And so I know I've kind of answered that question in a variety of ways there, but I mean, archery has always been a big part of my life, and it's just been within the last 5 or 6 years that I've now taken that and decided to introduce it to a whole nother group of people and share the benefits of archery with them.
Is there any interesting story of how your dad fell into archery?
I don't believe so. I don't. I know that the local archery club that's in town here, I mean, a lot of the archery clubs in Wisconsin have been around much longer than you and I have. I mean, this club that we support, that
as long as Old Fashions have been a part of Wisconsin culture.
Pretty good chance. Yeah, pretty good chance. So, but our local archery club, I think they started in the late 50s, early 60s. So I don't think my grandfather, he gun hunted, but he was not an archery guy. So I think it was just a close friend of my dad's that had started, shooting a bow and arrow and said, hey, you should give this a try. So I think that, that light bulb went on the first time my dad picked up a bow and arrow, and he was hooked. So that's kind of his introduction to archery came through a friend of his.
The way you described like the release of the arrow, a visualization kind of came into my head, and I'm wondering, because I've never done the compound bow. I'm trying to think if I've ever probably done anything other than like one like you described where it's got the suction cup at the end. But watching our common friend Ryan fire it at a recent event that I was at, it definitely hooked me on the simplicity, the skill level, and it reminded me of why I wanted to start barbecuing, because my dad's always been a gas guy, and I've always failed anytime I've tried charcoal. It's always ended up in a nightmare. Food's always undercooked, and I'm stressed trying to get the fire relit. And then I had someone show me how to charcoal, and I was like, wow, this actually is more of an art than something that you just like read a book on and it should figure it out. You know people that helped you do it. And the idea of understanding the art was really something I became hooked on, and realizing there's so much nuance to charcoal. And then watching him do the bow hunt, I realized, I was like, it's the same kind of concept where he's like, there's a reason why there's a level on this, because if it's not level when you fire it, the arrow doesn't do what you want. But it's also like, if as a person, we have a lot of stuck energy generally, like these stories, these feelings that most of the time we don't even process. And I can imagine, if you were to even draw the analogy that a bow stores the energy as you pull the string back, you're almost releasing that energy that you don't even know you need to in that moment that the arrow flies and finds its home.
Wow, I have never, as long as I've been around it, I've never heard it articulated like that, but there is a lot of truth in that, just from my own share. I mean, I work from home. COVID has been what it is for the last 2 years, but I mean, people in general, I think, just have a lot of frustrations in life. I mean, if you're being honest with yourself, nobody's living horseshoes and rainbows every day. So just to be able to, like I said, leave your phone inside, go outside and grab your bow and arrow. Yeah, there is some kind of a release that takes place in your mind when you shoot an arrow, and it's nothing but you and the target. So I think, and I also would agree with your barbecuing analogy there. I mean, it is an art. Archery is an art, and it's something that the more you do it, the better you get at it. And if you're good at something, you're going to want to do it more. So I think that Ryan is just a classic example. I mean, here's a guy that had never shot a bow and arrow up until 2 years ago, and now he is completely
He's your number one fan and customer.
He is just sold out on it. But I mean, he wants to bring everybody else that he can into the sport and share those benefits, that he's receiving with them as well, which is awesome.
And part of that analogy that I created comes from some of the stuff I've read on like yoga and any types of deep meditation and how like energy works and how they would describe it getting stuck in the heart. And I think that's exactly what you're releasing when you're focusing on your breath, which, going back to meditation, the breath is life. So when you can time your breath with that energy and let it go at the same time, like there is that spiritual essence of like you're no longer held on to that energy as it flies away and it's exactly where it's supposed to go. And I think there's a couple other like sub elements, and your dad did this, whether he didn't know probably that he was doing it. But when you do feel led into something and led by someone, there is a primal nature that comes from that. That is almost very much when, like, if say American Indians were teaching other young boys how to do the arrow, that feeling of having someone lead you through an exercise, that's therapeutic for both people. Because then you find value in what you have in your life when you can teach someone else how to do bow. But then the person receiving it feels led, and we all have an innate feeling to be led by generally a father, but generally any human being, when we get led to something, we feel like, man, that felt good. I don't feel lost. I feel seen, and I feel movement towards something. And that's, if that's not what we're all looking for, is some type of momentum and movement in life that like is a subconscious kind of feeling towards that.
Yeah, well, and I think you hit on something else there too. I mean, you talk about that, primal nature, and you reflect back to the Native Americans. I mean, 150 years ago, we didn't have the luxury of going to the grocery store and buying whatever we needed to put food on the table that night. At that point in time, it was a skill of survival. It was a necessity to be able to shoot proficiently with a bow and arrow if you wanted to live another day. So times have obviously changed quite a bit, but I think, again, for me, it's an opportunity to kind of trend back towards simpler times when life wasn't so, I don't want to say confusing, but I mean, there's so much, regardless of what walk of life you're from, you can't get away from the noise. And I think archery is a great way to do that, because even if you don't take up hunting, even if you just take up archery as a skill to go to the local range or shoot in the backyard with your family, it gets you off the couch. It gets you away from the TV. It gets you off your phone, and it gets you out doing something that's active, and it requires a skill. And I think the thing that the veteran community really loves about it, and I've heard this numerous times, is that it gives them back that camaraderie that they felt when they were serving, because once they're not serving anymore, they're off doing an 8-to-5 job. Yeah, they might have coworkers, but they might not love them.
Yeah, and the coworkers generally don't know them and understand them either.
Right, but this puts them back in that element of when they were serving, and now there's a bond created again that kind of reminds them of that time in service and the good times that they had there. And I mean, I just feel humbled to be a small part of this, because I mean, Ryan and countless other veterans have welcomed me into their family because of my love for them, wanting to love on them through the sport of archery. But I feel like I've been welcomed into their community, and so that's an honor to me to even be included in that group. And it lights me up to go to these archery shoots and see these guys shooting together, and see them cutting it up, see them having fun, and just knowing some of their stories, that they're able to put those on the shelf for that day and just get out into nature and get into the outdoors and shoot a bow and arrow. It's awesome.
When I watched the video that truly inspired me, like, I got to reach out to you, there was also this, because it was a pretty hard story of a man that was in a dark place. And for veterans that I've talked to and worked with, there's always this anxious feeling of lack of control, because in the military, we have the illusion of control, and we have some feeling like we know how to navigate it and we can feel in control. And then on the other side, like, we feel like we have no control over how life is happening to us. In that moment, I think we were holding that bow, you step into a spot where you get back to control. And when you're anxious and overwhelmed by like PTSD, it's the lack of control that scares the shit out of you. And that bow becomes this thing that like is a grounding mechanism almost for the rough seas that you're feeling as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to have David on your podcast. I mean, I've only known him for a little over a year, but he's flown up twice to our archery shoots. He's actually coming back up again in May for our first event this year. Most of it is high fenced, large ranches. I mean, some being several thousand acres, but most of it is high fence stuff where they have, both native game and exotic animals. But yeah, there's a ton of hunting in Texas. But I mean, he is the extreme case. I mean, archery has helped a lot of people. But in his case, it saved his life. He credits getting a bow and arrow put in his hand with saving his life. And I mean, when I started HHA USA, I said, if I can have one story like that, if we can impact one person's life, all the work that I do and my volunteers do is going to be worth it. I mean, we've already done that, only 3 years in, we're seeing those impacts. And that film was just the first of many. We actually have 3 or 4 more films this year that are going to get turned out with similar stories to that of people that have PTSD that have helped, archery and the outdoors have helped overcome that.
And this podcast started to bring every dad home because we come home physically, but we don't come home emotionally. What I originally saw in that video is that bow and arrow helped him come home, not physically, but helped him come home to himself. Like it gave him that tool to walk through that feeling that he was holding back and avoiding and hiding from. But now he's got on the other side, and that bow and arrow has allowed him to feel like he can live again. Like it's just a bow and arrow, but like going back to what I said, I think that release of the energy, the idea of control, which is the opposite of what we feel. It's just like, it's almost like pi in mathematics. It's a constant. When they're holding that bow, they understand the world, and it helps them just feel like it's going to be okay today.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable what it did for him. And I don't want to get off on too much of a rabbit trail, but I mean, he ultimately received that bow and arrow from a senior pastor at a church. And then he and his wife, shortly after that, started going back to church. He came back around to his faith. And it just, the combination of that bow and arrow and then becoming a born again Christian just became life changing for him, to the point where now he's in a much better place. I mean, he's not going to lie to you. He still has bad days, but archery and the outdoors have become a central part of his life, to the point where he now works for a veterans nonprofit in the San Antonio area that gets Gold Star kids, terminally ill children, and Purple Heart vets out on dream hunts on this ranch. So I mean, he's now working in his passion. He's making a living for his family off of archery and the outdoors, and impacting other veterans' lives through it. So I mean, it's remarkable the work that is being done through him by somebody reaching out to him and seeing that he was in need of help, and that bow and arrow, that stick and string, saved his life, and now it's saving others. It's just
one thought that I want to pivot to is when we think of a bow and arrow, being in Wisconsin, I feel like we're biased, that there's a simplicity to it that like, what could you get wrong? So I want to kind of just go like, what are some of like the things that maybe prevent people from thinking like they should even try bow and arrow? Like, what are some of the misconceptions about learning the art that maybe we can attack so people can see that like, hey, I should give this a shot?
Well, I think there's a few things. I mean, first and foremost, if you're gonna get into archery, you either need to work with somebody that does a lot of bow work themselves, as far as an archery enthusiast that does that work at their house, or you want to go to a pro shop where they have, trained professionals that are going to get you into a bow that's going to fit you. Because I mean, if you shoot a bow that is not sized properly for you, you're not going to be successful with it, and you're not going to enjoy it, and you're not going to want to pick it up again. So I think those are a couple big things. And then I think a lot of people, especially people that don't hunt, they automatically equate archery and hunting together. So they don't want to touch a bow because they know that it kills animals. But at the same time, there are hundreds of thousands of people around the world that shoot archery for recreation that don't hunt. So I think that's a huge misconception. If people don't want to hunt, well, I'm not going to shoot a bow and arrow. That's a huge misconception, because there is a lot of recreational archers that do it at a very high competitive level, even up to the Olympics, and some of those people don't hunt.
And I remember when I was talking to Ryan that he as well mentioned that, like, don't buy it on Amazon, don't buy it at Walmart, go to like a 3D range and let them, even if you have to pay a little bit more, this is one of those places where you want to go to the pro shop to buy your tennis racket, because in this case, they're going to make sure that they tell you things you don't even know about. And this is one of those classic examples that you don't know what you don't know. And going into a sport like this with that blinder and cataract on your eyes, you're going to go into it and be like, ugh. I mean, even podcasting, you can start a podcast and there's thousands of things that you should know. And you're going to get frustrated because you didn't ask anybody and you didn't work on knowing what you didn't know. And then the whole process just falls apart and you quit. So I could easily see that happening.
No, and that was a good recommendation on his part. And I mean, I don't want your listeners to be intimidated and think that they're going to ring up a huge bill by getting into the sport of archery, because I mean, it's just like anything. You can get a bow and arrow set up for $300. You can spend $2,300. You know, it just depends on how far you want to go, how advanced you want your equipment to be. But and the thing is with archery guys, especially hardcore archery guys and girls, is that it's just like cell phones. They turn their cell phone over. You know, when the new one comes out, they got to get the new one. So there's a lot of used archery equipment out there that can be had. So you're not going to have to break the bank to get into it.
I know several friends of like, I remember one friend, he asked his wife, like, what would you have to get in order for me to get a $1,500 bow? Like, how does this transaction work? If I were to get this, what does that like look like for you on your side for what you would want in consideration so that I get what I want?
Yeah, but like I said, there's I mean, my wife, I'm going to get her into archery this year. And I mean, the bow that I got for her, you know, at retail is about $400. So, I mean, it's not, relatively speaking, it's not an expensive hobby to get into. And I mean, I think, well, the thing that Ryan hit on why he got into it, I mean, he calls himself a projectile enthusiast. I love that. It's a great title. But I think when COVID hit, I think the price of ammunition just went through the roof. And so that's what turned him to archery, because, you know, you shoot a bullet, you're never going to get it back. Well, if you're halfway decent with a bow and arrow, you shoot your arrow, you go down to the target and you retrieve it. So, I mean, a good archer might only need a dozen arrows a year or a half dozen arrows a year. So your ammunition for a bow and arrow is reusable, and it's not as expensive as someone that is a gun enthusiast. And so that's what originally pointed Ryan towards archery, which I found kind of interesting.
I'm curious, how does your wife avoid getting into archery when you are an archery business owner, enthusiast, and you have it pretty much surrounded by, like, how did that like denial of waiting so long to get into it work?
I'm gonna take the blame for that, because we just, you know, even though we don't have kids, we have busy lives following our nieces and nephews around. I've got a business, she's got a full-time job, we have a nonprofit to run, and it I don't know how it never came up sooner. But I mean, and this bow unfortunately has been hanging in my basement for 3 years waiting for her to shoot it, and we finally were talking about it last week. I've had her bow hanging in our basement for the last 3 years, and it's just been one of those things that we've allowed life to get too busy with the other stuff and the distractions. And this spring, I'm finally going to get her out on the range and start shooting. So
the irony that you're probably going to face is just almost like the dating aspect of creating time to do something that's not like a regular date. You're going to be like, how did we not do this so long ago? Like, you're going to have it like smacking you in the face, like, this feels really connected right now. Like, how did we not think this is something we should do? And now you're going to be like making up time and doing it even more then.
I hope you're right. And I mean, I ultimately am taking the fault for this, because I mean, back when her and I first started dating, I mean, at that point I was still, because archery is all I've ever done. I mean, it's the only job I've ever had. So I mean, I've been in the archery space for 35 years as a career. And so as much as I love it, there was a time or a point in time where it almost felt like a job. And so I didn't even do it as much personally. I was divorced back in 2010 and just went through a pretty dark place myself. And archery was not a high priority then. I was off doing other stuff. And I don't want to say I got sick of it, but I had been doing it for so long that I kind of, my enthusiasm for the sport died out. And I hate to admit that, but it's true. But then after getting remarried, and then after everything came about with the veterans and seeing how impactful archery was to them, it really relit my fire for the sport. And I feel like I almost took it for granted for a few years.
And I realized how important of a tool, and maybe even some of the healing in your own story that you needed to go through that you were avoiding. Yeah, no, there was definitely some benefits that I got out of getting back into not just archery, but hunting in general. Because I mean, I wasn't a big rifle hunter, but that was something that I got back into in the last handful of years. And now I enjoy that almost as much as I do archery hunting. So I mean, it's easier to harvest a deer with
with a gun at 150 yards than it is with a bow and arrow. And so just as a way to fill my freezer and just to get out and enjoy that time, it's just in general, my passion for the outdoors has been relit, and I have the veteran community to thank for part of that. So.
And I want to highlight something that's almost disconnected from archery, but it's connected in the same way, is we always feel disconnected in just the process of life as a veteran. We feel alone, we feel isolated, we feel unseen, and we feel invisible to the world. By finding this tool where people are coming together to learn it, you then create new friendships. And just like that guy in San Antonio, Texas, like he is now taking that and creating new communities of veterans to help through. And that connected feeling is really how you make a difference on this process of helping dads figure out how to be dad and not end up killing themselves, is finding like people like yourself to grow and get connected. So, I mean, that's a sub thing below all of this, but so many friendships that are probably going to be lifelong friendships forever, all because someone picked up a bow. Like that just seems incredible to me, even well beyond all the other wins that your nonprofit has going for you.
Well, and you're exactly right. I mean, that is one of the biggest wins. I mean, obviously we want to reduce that 22 a day. That is our purpose. But the friendships that are getting built as a result of this, you're exactly right. I mean, we literally have people flying in from coast to coast for our archery shoots this year to tiny little central Wisconsin, and that's humbling to know that people see that much value in our cause. And they want to come back to these shoots because, hey, I met this guy here last year. I can't wait to hang out and shoot arrows with him again. And who else am I going to meet? I mean, I get goosebumps just talking about it. It's very humbling to be a small part of a community like that and know what's happening there. And
the hard part as a marketer, because I've gone to different conferences, and I was just actually at a men's retreat this past weekend, and there were 18 guys there. But conferences, there's usually hundreds of people. You can't really sell the connection that comes there, because if you try to describe it, most people would tell you you're full of shit. But when you describe it and feel it in real life, you're like, man, I needed that. But trying to put that on a brochure and trying to hey, you should come here so that you can just feel connected to these other people. People are like, you're full of shit. I don't think that's going to happen. Especially if someone's never affected it or never felt it, or just is selling their own and buying their own BS in their head. That feeling, though, is so impactful. So if you have an opportunity like what HHA is doing, or any other opportunity where you just get to randomly jump into a space where you don't know anybody, but essentially the likelihood of running into someone that could change your life is so much higher in those cases, man, those spaces can be the one conversation that changes your life. And you're like, but you can't put on a brochure. Like, most people won't believe it if you're like, oh, you come to this event and meet someone that could change your life. You're like, what? No one's gonna sell that and actually make that happen. But you don't even do anything other than facilitate the space, and it just happens. So I'd encourage anybody that's out there listening that hasn't done anything like that. Archery is just a tool, but those events bring people together that have the commonalities that there's a man out there that needs to hear what you need to hear. And someone out there needs to hear what you have to say. And that's how we worked in this problem together.
Yeah. And I mean, because I mean, I'm a marketing guy by trade, and yeah, how do you bottle that up and put it on a brochure, put it on a website, put it in a 2-minute video, to market that to the general public. And that is a challenge. But I think we've done a fairly good job of that. I think, like you said, that's difficult to bottle up. How do you put that on a flyer? How do you put it on a website? How do you put it in a 2-minute video? But I did
do a really good job in that video, though, because that video definitely was, it sold the feeling of this just isn't a bow and arrow.
Well, and that's, I think, our producer is just second to none. I mean, he has a way of capturing a story and making people gravitate towards that cause and resonate with them. And I mean, Ryan's going to be one of those stories. His film will be coming out here by the end of the summer. The gentleman that introduced me to him, same deal. He's a military dad. I'd love to have him on your podcast as well, because I mean, he's got PTSD. He's now starting a veterans organization to get them into archery. He'll be at all of our shoots this year. So yeah, it's I think back to last May was our first shoot. That's actually where David's footage was filmed for that production. And we had a competition shoot that night. and I didn't shoot very well, and I got eliminated fairly early on. But that was a blessing because I was able to kind of stand back and watch kind of what transpired the rest of the evening and just see veterans and civilians coming together around the sport of archery, seeing the laughs, seeing the conversation, seeing the hugs and the camaraderie. And that evening kind of really shifted our focus, because when we first started out, we were very heavy with the honor flight, which we still do stuff with them. Great organization. But I just feel like the honor flights have been around to the point now where there's a little bit more public awareness for them than there is for this cause that you and I are talking about. So we're going to shift more of our resources towards getting bows and arrows into people's hands and help them out. And that night last May in Warrens, Wisconsin, kind of set us on that trajectory.
And it's crazy how those events happen. And this is the lie that veterans sell and buy at the same time, is that these types of life-changing days don't exist, because all they see is repeat. They feel the same way. But I'm here to say I've had so many of those. Even this past weekend was that type of event for me. And that's when you have to lean in and almost do the opposite of what your intuition is doing. I want to ask a different question that we maybe go a little bit deeper in the fatherhood story. I could easily see, as a veteran dad, learning to understand this bow and arrow, teaching his son or daughter to do this is also a healthy process of passing down this skill so that they have a tool to process life and to deal with life and to release that energy that might get stuck when it comes to them. Do you ever do events that are father and son orientated like that?
We don't do a specific father-son event, but I mean, I think to, 3 or 4 of my closest friends that are volunteers / ambassadors, whatever you want to call them, for HHA USA, they have sons and daughters, and their kids are going to get into archery if they haven't already. It's just something that, dad does it. That's cool. I want to go out and shoot my bow too. So it definitely, I mean, it's not that they're forcing it on them, but I think the kids just see it and they see the enjoyment and the peace and the calm that it brings to dad. So, hey, I want to go out and do that with you as well. So, and David, who was on our, on that video, he was able to witness his son, harvesting his first doe down in Texas last year. So, I mean, he's already at the age where he can hunt. And that's another thing, not to get off on a squirrel trail again here, but for those that maybe are not into archery, but want to eat better, that's definitely an angle that we've seen a lot of organizations go at for as far as organic goes. I mean, everybody wants to go organic and eat healthier. You're not going to get a healthier meat than you are, some
grass-fed deer out in the middle of the wilderness.
Some fresh venison, exactly. So I know I kind of changed topics on you there, but that's been a huge push as well. And I mean, David and his family, they have a lot of food allergies, so they need that natural meat. They could go out and buy organic meats from elsewhere, but I mean, for him to get out into the woods and now share that with his family and basically bring stuff back to put on the table, that's getting back to that 150 years ago.
There's one other thing that I often talk about, and I want to just anchor it with this, is that one of the things that dads struggle with and kids struggle with, especially when there's been a loss of a father for whatever reasons, whether he gets old and dies or whether something tragically happens or whether he takes his own life, or if he's actively deployed, or if he's in the military and he gets deployed and maybe he doesn't come home, is creating anchor memories that your kids have where they can go visit you. Not like a gravestone, but where they can like visit your presence. Because what kids often struggle with is when you're not there, they don't feel like they have a place to go talk to you. They don't have this place to go tap into, like, the most powerful question, as I describe it, that a kid's going to ask after you're gone is, what would dad do? And this is also an anchor memory that whether you're here tomorrow, a week, 10 years, or 20 years, if you teach your kids this process of archery and you do it together, your kid's going to have a way to tap into who you are. He's going to have a way to tap into your memory. And also remember that whether you're there or not, you're always there because you have this common feeling of, because there's going to be a feeling attached to this bow. And every time he pulls that back, he's going to be able to even feel and hear his dad's wisdom in the back of his head of telling him what to do and how to improve. And that's so important as adults, whether we're here or not, that we can pass down that place that kids can visit and ask that question, what would dad do? Especially if you're deployed or getting ready to deploy. You have to do this before you leave, but create these anchor memories, because when you're gone for a year at a time, for whatever wars we might be in the future, these memories are the thing that will help ground your child so that when you come home, like, it's not rebuilding the relationship. he's had this place to go to maintain the relationship.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, if I had a son and was in, whether I was in the service or not, I mean, teaching him or a daughter to shoot a bow and arrow, what a great place to have that. I mean, it's a healthy outlet for a child, and instead of sitting on a video game or eating a bowl of junk food. I mean, let's go outside and shoot the bows. And if dad's gone, if dad's deployed, obviously you want to do it in a safe environment. But I mean, there's so many organizations for kids to get into archery now too, where once they get introduced, now they can be part of like traveling archery teams. I mean, there's a lot to chew on there. But I think that's definitely a great point. I mean, I think about my own life. I mean, my dad introduced me to archery. The land that we hunted on, he passed away a couple of years ago, but the land that we hunted on has been in our family for over 100 years. And I still have one of the last tree stands that he sat in is still, I mean, it's been 20 years. The Father Time has not been too kind to it. It's kind of twisted on the tree, but that's still out in the tree, the last place that he shot a deer. And I see that multiple times a season. So, I mean, it's impossible to look at that and not flash back to, good memories of him and the fact that he introduced me to archery. And I spend, hundreds of hours out in that woods every fall hunting, even though he's not there with me anymore. He is, because his memories are there.
And it also allows, I mean, we're only forgotten when people don't remember our name. And so if we can create a place like you have to go and just relive that wisdom, the experience, the memory, the feeling, I mean, your dad will always be remembered because it's going to be a story passed down, and it's going to be a feeling that you describe to other people. I mean, everything you do is kind of this, however can I create and pass down this gift that my father gave me, and to make sure that gift keeps on giving, and that this other new modality can be just as healing as it's been for my life and for others as well.
Yeah, it sounds like we're kind of overstating the importance of a bow and arrow. And I mean, that can be done through anything. Maybe it's through golf. Maybe it's through
this
baseball.
is just one tool, but
archery is just one tool. But yeah,
I would say this is also the non-obvious one. Like fishing is an easy one. That's probably the most obvious one that I cycle up when I talk about the idea the most. Really, golfing would be another one, depending on where you're at in the country. But archery, to me, like, just because of what you described and the way the people have gone through it and what they've experienced, I would say it's even different than fishing. Because, I mean, fishing is kind of peaceful, but there's not much about releasing, like, that you're going to feel like literally fly out. Like we talked about in the beginning, that energy, like building it up and then just letting it go and literally having something leave you, feeling that feeling. I think there is something unique about archery that the other anchor memories could be good. But say if your kids went through something traumatic, that archery would already be a tool they have to go use. Like it could be literally be something they don't know when they need it, but then when they need it, they know how to process it and they don't get stuck, which is the worst case scenario when you have something traumatic happen to you.
Yeah, well, and there's always the, anytime you see anything in writing about archery, I've written it on the bottom of emails and letters I've sent to people and received it in my life, shoot straight. Well, obviously that's a play on words being in our industry, but also, I mean, who doesn't want to shoot straight in this life? Think about that for a minute, and just the skills that it teaches you as far as, being disciplined and taking care of your equipment and hitting the mark every time. And there are times, I mean, I put a post out on my social media. I'd have to look back. It was probably a year ago, but I shot a group of arrows in my yard and 5 of the 6 were in the bullseye, but one of them was off over here. And I mean, we're going to have days like that. We're not going to hit the mark every day, but that doesn't mean that I'm never going to pick my bow up again or walk outside and take on life. I mean, life is not a bullseye every time you pull the bow back, but that doesn't mean we don't keep shooting.
That's an amen for any business owner out there.
or anybody in life. I mean, that's just, that's the harsh reality of the world that we live in, but we have to, there's always another arrow to shoot.
Yeah. So where can people get in touch if they are in Wisconsin, or if they want to be like the other people that fly into your events? Where's the best place to find some information about what you do, or even the nonprofit, if that's where the website would be for that event?
Yes, I mean, we've essentially got 2 different, my for-profit business is HHA Sports. That's the organization that my dad started. It's been around for almost 40 years, and we build mainly the sites is what we make for the bows. HHAsports.com, that's where you can find all that information. Excuse me. And then our nonprofit is hhausa.org. So that is that tells more about everything that we're doing on the nonprofit side. And this year we'll host 6 events across Wisconsin, starting in May, going through the end of August. And those are it's billed as the HHA USA Veterans Archery Shoot Tour. And once in a while, people will say, well, do you have to be a veteran to attend? Absolutely not. I mean, it's probably more civilians than it is veterans, but it's just that the money that is raised goes back to our veterans and our first responders, thus the title.
And that even in itself, often civilians, I mean, it's probably something you felt, is they often really struggle with how to make up for the sacrifice that veterans. And I mean, most of them will just thank you for your service. But most of them, if they're honest, they say it because they feel like they need to, or that's what they should, but it doesn't ever feel like it does enough. So this is also a great way to give to an organization that creates support, to create and connect with the environment, because on the other side of this, in a completely non-archery way, one of the best gifts that you can give a veteran is to sit down and listen to a story. Help him deburden his story from his life. And all you got to do is Forrest Gump it. Sit down on a bench somewhere and just listen to their story as they tell it. That in itself is probably something that happens naturally throughout the different course of events. So as a civilian, these places are also a great way to truly, if you want to show your support towards military, this is a great way to do it in a big, giant fall swoop, and it closes a couple different boxes in just helping veterans before and after, and the ones at the event.
Yeah, I mean, they are great events in so many ways. I mean, and I know, depending on the severity of PTSD, some people don't like crowds. I mean, we're not packing thousands of people in. I mean, we get anywhere from, maybe 75 to 150 people, 200 people on a weekend. So most of our shoots are all Saturdays and Sundays. So, and if you don't want to, hang out at the clubhouse, if you want to just come and shoot a bow and arrow, well, then you and 3 or 4 of your buddies can go out on the course. And, for people that haven't shot a 3D archery course, it's basically like playing golf with a bow and arrow. You just walk around and shoot at targets anywhere from 15 to 50 yards in range, anywhere from 20 to 30 targets. And it's very therapeutic, and it's very relaxing. And we're excited to be, like I said at the beginning, kind of using all the blessings that we've been given in the archery community to now give back to the veteran and first responder community, and come alongside and love on those guys and gals that need our help.
Well, this is, other than the Ryan episode, this is the very first opening of archery on the podcast. So I hope we answered all the questions. And if you didn't, hopefully we'll be talking to other archery people, and also those veterans that you talked about, they'll be hopefully coming on the podcast, and we can dive into even more questions. So if there was a question you want answered, let me know, ben@militaryveterandad.com. But Chris, I really appreciate you coming on today, opening our eyes to archery and helping us understand that it's not something to be scared of. It can be really a Swiss Army knife for whatever you need it to be in life. And it doesn't have to be just something that takes life. It can just be something that, in this way, as I say it, helps you give yourself life by releasing whatever you've got inside.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, my wheels are already turning. You're going to get quite a few HHA USA disciples on your podcast, archery guys, military dads that'll be able to speak into this a lot more than I can. So,
well, I look forward to being an HHA evangelist and spreading it from the rooftops, and I will definitely be looking it up myself to try to get up there and also get some funds put away so that I can get a bow, because it's watching Ryan do it. It's definitely been an itch on my heart, and I don't have a lot of those things. And only the ones that I did have kind of have gone to the wayside with kids. So I'm looking forward to doing this. And irony is, I used to have a neighbor that would always be shooting archery in his backyard, maybe like 8 years ago. I always thought he was kind of weird, because I was like, I just never met someone that did archery. And now looking back, I was like, I missed a ripe opportunity by thinking, oh, that's weird. And I could have had a conversation. We could have done it together. And we never really had like a friendship. We talked to each other as neighbors, but there was an opportunity to connect, and I missed it. So if you're like me, don't miss it, and make sure you take the opportunities as they come. So Chris, again, thank you for coming on the podcast. I look forward to it. And all those links and websites will be in the show notes for you to check out. Chris, thank you, and have a great day, man.
You too, Ben. Thanks a lot.
All righty then. I've always wanted to say in that podcast, Ace Ventura is one of my favorite movies growing up. Classic flashback. But to the big topic, my big takeaway. This episode touched me in a deep way, in a way of understanding this new idea that I'm getting ready to step into, because I've never done anything with archery my entire life. The excitement of getting into it, but on a deeper level, the part where we touched on the part of actually like releasing the energy, and why is it that archery is a tool and a mechanism to heal as a veteran? Well, if you think of all the things that were holding back the stuck up energy, if you were to visualize the energy behind a dam, that energy has to get released. And the tool of literally pulling back the bow, letting that energy and tension build up, because essentially if you go back to physics, when you pull it back, you have potential energy. And when you let go, the energy begins to do the work. It's kinetic energy. And it's that potential energy combined with the kinetic energy that I think connects with a person's soul and allows it to release and just kind of let go of that. So I will validate that theory as I get my first bow here soon, and hopefully dive into it even more. If this is something that you're looking for, make sure you take the resources that Chris talked about. Google, reach out to your local 3D archery range. Just something you can go into Google, do 3D archery ranges near me. Something that I did immediately after hanging out with Ryan. So guys, make sure you're looking up archery. If you've never done it, try it, because like I said, the ability to learn a new skill is something that really is important for a veteran to keep moving, because we learn a lot of skills. The military invests a lot of energy to make sure that our skills are efficient, and we're always learning new ways to think, feel, and act. Well, though, as I say, feel out loud, they do not do a good enough job helping us learn how to feel, but in all the other areas, they do. So make sure you're taking the effort that you did while you served on the other side, now that you're out, and finding ways to serve. That is all I have for you today. If you have been a longtime listener, I do have an ask though. If you've been a longtime listener to this podcast, I ask that you share it with a veteran, first responders, law enforcement. These people need to know the tools, because I say first responders and law enforcement because minus the word military, everything else we talk about applies to what they go through. They see trauma, they see service. They are also even more so seeing trauma on the day and coming back and trying to pretend it's all normal. Veterans at least have this buffer where we go away, see war, we come back, we have this miles and miles and thousands of miles of distance. So law enforcement has some of the same stuff. So if you know law enforcement, if you know someone in the first responders or a military or a regular veteran, whatever it may be, I would be wholeheartedly appreciative of you sharing this podcast. This podcast only grows and reaches more dads out there if you, the listener, shared it. If you didn't get value from it, I don't want you to share it. I want you to tell me what we could do to make it better, to earn that share. Let me know how this podcast can improve, what you want me to stop doing. Don't talk about that. Don't talk about that story, or look and bring on these types of guests, because these are the ones that would really help me move through. Or if I brought someone on and you're like, you know what, we really need more of those people, like maybe stories connected to archery that we talked about that Chris is going to connect and hopefully bring on some more stories of people that have walked through their stories using archery. Guys, I would humbly and appreciative anybody that shares this podcast. Like I said, that is all we have for this week, and I will be back again with you next Monday.